I am Flavia Belliani Zimmerman from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us the CEO of the Perth USAsia Center, Professor Gordon Flake, and we are going to be discussing American politics beyond Trump. Thank you for being with us, Gordon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Professor Flake, if you can please explain to us the leading factors behind the rise of Donald Trump.
Oh, this is a much discussed and much debated issue, and it has been over the course of the last 2.5 years. I think it's safe to say at this point that almost universally his election was a surprise. People had anticipated a very different outcome, and so a lot of effort has been spent to try to identify the specific factor. And there literally are hundreds. In many respects, it was a perfect storm. You can say with some accuracy, if it hadn't been for the last-minute release of the Comey letter, Hillary Clinton would have won and Trump would have lost. If it hadn't been for targeted Russian interference in specific states, they would have won. If it hadn't been for, there's been lots and lots of different scenarios where you say, the outcome would have been very, very differently. I tend to focus on one factor overall, and that's apathy. Apathy in an American electorate system that allows only the most motivated voters to come out and vote and most people to stay at home, or many people to stay at home. So in contrast to Australia, where we have mandatory voting, the United States doesn't have mandatory voting. And so as a result, one of the key factors you need to understand in understanding this past election is that less people turned out to vote than people could have turned out to vote. In other words, I think the final turnout was about 58%. And as a result, you didn't get kind of a full spectrum view of what's happening in the United States. You end up having apathy. So in other words, had the same number of people that turned out to vote for President Obama in 2012 turned out in 2016, the result would have been the exact opposite. But they didn't. They didn't show up. Now you can say that was because of a bad campaign on the part of Hillary Clinton. You can say it was because President Trump was successful in motivating others to come out. But in the end, the result was the effect. It was the same. It was basically apathy that drove that, and the system doesn't allow it. I would highlight one other factor, which is I think really important. It'll go into our discussion this evening as well, and that is that for the last, I think, over 30 years, probably close to 40 years, with every single election, it means every 4 years on the presidential cycle, the percentage of the voting electorate that was made up of whites, and in particular white males, had been going down. Those numbers had been decreasing. And that just as a result of the changing demographics of the United States. And so one of the reasons why states like California or New York are largely considered to be out of reach of Republicans is that California has become a majority-minority state, that demographics are shifting. Well, something really interesting happened between 2008, 2012, and 2016, and that is that President Trump, for the first time in 40 years, reversed that trend. So the percentage of the overall electorate that was made up of whites, and in particular white males, went up. Now, you can talk about why that was. I mean, an appeal to anxiety about the white working class, an appeal to racism, appeal to anti-immigrant sentiments, which had two basic effects. One, to suppress voting on the part of minorities and others, and to increase voting to those who were worried. But that one factor alone is the preeminent factor, I think, that explains it. When you add that, plus apathy, plus lower voter turnout in terms of Democratic voters last time around, that you add them together to all the other factors, and again, you don't have that perfect storm.
Thank you very much, Professor Flake. And if you can please explain to us how Trump's leadership style affects American politics and society.
Well, we're 2.5 years, almost 3 years into the administration right now, and it's pretty clear that he has a highly divisive leadership style. It is tradition in American politics that during the primary, you have to tack to your base, right? So if you're a Democrat, you tack to the left. If you're a Republican, you tack to the right. You try to motivate your base. Again, because you don't have mandatory voting, you're trying to get people excited enough to come out, to take off work because you don't get a holiday in the U.S. to vote, to come out and be energized enough to come to the polls. And so you've got to go towards more extreme positions. And then when you come back to the general election, you then have to tack towards the center. And then the next step normally is, once you're elected, you make the statement that you are the president for all Americans. Whether you voted for me or not, you attempt to be a unifying force. And that has been a common feature through every presidency, at least in my lifetime, and every presidency I know in known memory in terms of the presidency. President Trump hasn't ruled that way. He is intensely focused on what he calls his base or his people, and has tended to vilify all those that don't agree with him. And again, that's seen every day in terms of his discourse. And so whether it's the media or it's the Congress or it's Democrats or whoever it is at the time, anyone opposed to him or not saying the nicest things about him will quickly be made into an enemy. It would be otherized in that context. And so it is, without doubt, a highly divisive leadership style, and you see that every day in the media in terms of the relative tumult that I would describe that is U.S. politics today.
Thank you. And Professor Flake, can you please explain to us future political trends in the U.S. in a post-Trump world?
This is the hard thing, right? I, like most people, was wrong in my predictions for 2016. Didn't see it coming. Ultimately, I think anybody that tells you today that they know what will happen a year and 2 months from now in November of 2020 is overly optimistic, shall we say. And the reason is because there's a lot of other factors. I think the most important one is that you can't beat something with nothing. So in the current context, President Trump continues to be one of the least popular presidents in American history. He, over the course of 2.5 years, has not been able to increase the size of his base. He has not attempted to increase the size of his base. And as a result, he just constantly dwells in that 35 to 40% approval rating range, with the vast majority of Americans opposed to him, 56 to 60% in that process. So normally you would think that's a scenario for losing, for guaranteed losing. But until you know who he's up against, you really don't know the answer to that. And so if you ask me honestly, if you get someone like Bernie Sanders, or even Elizabeth Warren, who's extremely intelligent and capable, but I personally believe tends to be far to the left of the average American voter, you could have a scenario in which President Trump wins again. But my broader belief is that if you got any mainstream, even somewhat boring Democratic candidate that was basically competent, that unique alignment of factors which led to Trump's election in 2016 is almost impossible to replicate. At least that's what I want to believe. I may be inaccurate in that process. Now, does that tell us about the future? No, because there's been an awful lot that has changed in the last 2.5 years. There is a wonderful author named Amy Siskind, who was an investment banker, but has became so motivated by the politics she saw during the Trump era. She began something called The List. If you go to theweeklylist.org, you'll see that over the first year of the Trump presidency, she put together a weekly list of every action the Trump administration did that broke a law, a standard, a norm of behavior that just was unusual, because the theory was that we needed to have breadcrumbs to find our way back. Because if we're looking towards the future of the system and all these things have been broken, then we need to know what was broken, how they were. So she has this list, and now it's two volumes plus in terms of length, and it's just literally every single day something stunning. And that's one of the real challenges. To answer that question fully, you've got to take stock of where we are. And the problem with the current cycle is that this president is so controversial, and again, so reveling in confusion and mayhem, that every day you see something that would just shock you in any other thing, which would normally be an issue that would dominate an entire presidency for 4 years. But before you can fully comprehend and digest it, the next day there's another one, and the next day there's another one, and the next day there's another one. So long story short, like the old adage, if you ever find yourself in a a hole, the first step is to stop digging. Right? We haven't stopped digging yet. And so to know where we've got to go, we've got to first stop digging and then take stock. But it's going to be a long, long, difficult process for the United States. And if anybody thinks that there's going to be a quick snap back to normal, I think will be woefully disappointed.
Thank you very much, Professor Flake. And wrapping up our interview, in your opinion, if we move towards a second Trump administration, how do you think this is going to impact America and world politics?
So right now, there's no question that the United States has become a destabilizing factor in foreign policy. They have, been not a builder of institutions, standards, and norms, but at this point, tearing down the very institutions, standards, norms, laws, organizations which they built. And as a result of that, the United States' role in foreign policy is a tenuous one at this point, right? They are clearly disinclined towards any form of multilateralization, dearly disinclined towards alliances, not understanding them, at least the Trump administration is. And so you'll see real challenges just this week in the G7, or with NATO, or with long-standing allies like Canada. And you'll see a deep hostility towards trade or anything that is complex and international that involves something that Australians would cherish, like the rules-based order. So at the current point, again, the United States is a bad actor on those things from an Australian point of view. Now, I think what you're seeing is globally, both in Canberra and in Tokyo and in London, Berlin, everywhere around the world, a hope that we will have some return to normalcy. The hope that this administration will end. It's only got a year and a half left, and that then we can begin to take stock and kind of repair the damage. If President Trump were to be reelected, I know this sounds like hyperbole, that I'm just kind of going over the top. The post-World War II international order, the liberal rules-based order as we know it, would be jeopardized, if not doomed, because the waiting and the hoping would be gone, and everyone would begin to hedge and shift, and so we would be in a very different position. So clearly, a lot rides on the shoulders of American voters in 18 months.
Thank you very much, Professor Flake. Thank you for being with us. And for more information, please visit our website, www.internationalaffairs.org.au.